I want you to get together.
Yes, hi, Mike. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Thanks for being here. Sorry, I was just finishing off a little bit of a rant there, but I think I've got you back now. And yeah, so thanks for coming on. You've been messaging me on Telegram for quite a while, haven't you? Just asking to come on and talk about a few ideas about the Millennial Kingdom. So I'll leave it to you, Louis, and you tell me what you want to talk about today, and I'll reply.
All right, great. Yeah, it's kind of a hodgepodge of some things that I've been working on,
Mm-hmm.
and nothing is finished. It's all subject to change and interpretation, but a couple interesting things I found. But before I get into that, I just wanted to thank you, first of all, for having me on.
Mm-hmm.
And the brother before, amazing story. Praise God for that. That's incredible testimony.
Yeah.
So that was very edifying for me to listen to. I never went through that stuff, but I know people who did similar substance abuse stuff. So it hit home, even though it wasn't me personally. Good to hear. Um, yeah. So let me see. Is it possible for me to share my screen? I have some slides.
You can
Maybe.
actually. Yeah, let me just make sure I've got the right one up first. If you want to just share that screen now, and I'll see what happens. I think you literally just press screen share. It should be in the bottom corner. And the bottom on the right is where I see it. It's next to chat. There we go. Right, so give me 1 second. Let me make sure that's just sharing on
Okay.
OBS, my streaming software. So I think it is. I think they can see the screen. Yeah, so there it's sharing now. Go ahead.
All right. Cool. So I just made this little timeline here. I'm going to start with Genesis 6:1-3. Came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, blah blah blah. That Yah said, the man's days shall be numbered to 120 years.
Mm-hmm.
I don't take that as literally 120 years because people lived way longer than that after the flood, and
Mm-hmm.
it just doesn't seem like that's a steadfast number. So I like the interpretation that that means jubilees, which are cycles of 49 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be about 5,880 years exactly. So I kind of take that and built a timeline off of that. So there's two ways it works here from creation, which on the Septuagint timeline, because I think that's the more accurate one, which takes the birth of Christ to about 5,500, between 5,000 and 5,500
Mm-hmm. I've heard that
years
one. Yeah.
since creation. So if 5,880 years would be 100 jubilees, 120 jubilees from creation, that would take us to about 480 AD. And all of these numbers are ish. I rounded them all off to fives and zeros just to kind of make it easier to see, except for all the way on the right, 2024. It's where we are. So that would take us to about 480 AD. Fall of Rome, roughly 476, around that area. And also, the verse itself says, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, that this decree went out from God. So it might not be from creation itself. It might be somewhere in between creation and the flood.
Mm-hmm.
So I just took the year Enoch was translated, which again, roughly 3,850,
Mm-hmm.
move that forward 5,880 years till I think it's 2030 that comes to. So that would be right in the future. But again, that's just an arbitrary, I took Enoch's date, and that date might not even be correct. But it
Yeah.
kind of gives us a general idea of where we are if the Jubilee interpretation is correct, which that might not be either.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I just put some on the bottom there. Enoch translated the flood roughly 3150 BC.
Yep.
Abram was born about 2000, the first temple about 1000 when Solomon started to build it, not when it was completed. So the seventh year of Solomon's reign, roughly about 1000 BC. So there's 1,000 years there. That's a millennium.
Mm-hmm.
From the first temple to the birth of Christ, 1000 BC to 0 is 1,000 years, millennium.
Mm-hmm.
And then we look from when the second temple was they started and stopped and started and stopped when you read Daniel, Nehemiah, and Ezra. So it's one of those dates, about 520 BC to again 480 AD, the fall of Rome ish. That would be another 1,000 years. And I'm just kind of toying with from the fall of Rome to about 1480 is the capital millennium. So I don't think, on my current understanding, that years were added or taken away to the timeline.
Mm-hmm.
I think that names and dates were changed, and stuff was taken out and maybe put in that didn't happen and so forth. But I don't think we lost maybe all that much time. That's just where I am currently. I'm definitely open to, changing my mind on that.
Mm-hmm.
So that would mean it's been about, if 1480 was the end of the millennium, we don't know when Satan was released, we don't know when New Jerusalem left, and any of those things, but it would be about 544 years of little season,
Mm-hmm.
as it were. That seems like a long time for a little season. It's like half a day in millennial days, so that might not be correct, but just putting this out there. And then also the many tekel upharsin. When you calculate that in terms of numbers, it comes out to 2,520. And I thought it was interesting that the Second Temple was 520 BC and 480 AD. Kind of, you can add that and take that away. So that may be something that I haven't quite figured out where to place that yet. Because Daniel would have been about, I guess, between 600 BC and 520 BC in that area. So when he received that prophecy in Belteshazzar's time, again, we don't have the exact dates, but it's something to consider and to throw in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one understanding. Then on the next slide, I have a completely different understanding, which the numbers are a little bit different, but similar. So I guess before we move on, was there anything that you wanted to maybe address on here?
No, it's interesting you've gone for a non-revisionist history approach here, because like I said, most of this people who theorize this do not believe that there's been as much time as they claim. Like I said, and things like, for example, the space between, you said, the millennium of, the birth of Christ all the way to 480 AD, which was the fall of Rome. You're saying that was the destruction of the Second Temple. Well, people would say that happened in 70 AD. And that time period between 70 AD and the collapse of Rome in, let's say, 536 roughly, or 480, that wasn't as long as they say it actually was. It was actually only maybe and they've, like I said, orchestrated and invented a lot of false history to make that time seem longer. But I've also heard other people theorize, other channels saying, well, no, the history we have is correct. It's just the order has been messed up to the point where we're not sure when things actually happened in the timeline, but the amount of history is correct. So it's interesting to see a timeline that maps out true history as we have it documented exactly. The only issues I can, like I said, see with this is the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, and where that would actually fit into this. And when exactly did the millennium begin? So you're saying it began in 480 AD. So from this angle, was there a period before the official beginning of the millennial kingdom? Christ may have returned in 70 AD and brought destruction upon the temple, and everything began then, but the reign didn't begin until 400 years later. Is that what you're saying there?
Sorry, the dogs have been acting up today.
Was it something I said?
No, the neighbor was doing something with her cows in the corral, and they were getting loud, and the dogs, they've been on edge since then, so I've been trying to calm them down, but
okay.
they're at a hairpin at the moment.
Yeah.
So I guess it's important, I think, with the 70 AD, if I can address that.
Sure.
The way I see it, and especially you can see it a lot in the prophets, it's very clear to see in the prophets that there's the destruction of Jerusalem, which I'm willing to, it's funny that we try to look back at history knowing that it's wrong. So like, how much of it can we rely on and use? And I hate to even quote it with the understanding that I don't believe it, So all I can really do is believe the Bible and what that says. So, it seems that the judgment starts at the house of God, and the pattern that we see from, really back in the wilderness, but if we want to say from Judges, the book of Judges forward, God rescues his people, sets them in a perfect place, provides for them, and then they rebel. He gets upset with them and brings in somebody to scatter them or to oppress them or to rule over them. They cry out because of the oppression, and then he defeats the oppressors, and the cycle starts over again. He sets up the people, they rebel, and he brings somebody else in, and then he gets rid of those people that came in to do his bidding. We see that especially with Nebuchadnezzar, right? He calls Nebuchadnezzar his servant, that he was doing his bidding to, destroy the temple and scatter the Israelites through Babylon. So he used them to do that because they just refused to repent.
Mm-hmm.
So I think 70 AD would follow the same exact pattern. He used Rome to come in. The judgment started at the house of God, officially scattered them throughout the world. And I think it's Luke 21:24 that in the three discourses, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Luke's the only one where it mentions that, Israel is scattered throughout the nations to be a witness until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. Okay. So I would say then that the time of the Gentiles, with my understanding, is from 70 AD to 480-ish AD, around there, 580 if you want to round it. So they were taken out of Jerusalem and Judea, were finally scattered by the Romans at Yah's will. Just basically that he used Rome to scatter the people, to scatter the people in Judea and Jerusalem. Yeah. He brought his wrath upon them. And then the so-called day of the Lord, as it's mentioned, is the judgment of the nations, the judgment of the Gentiles. Yeah. So those are two separate events that the space in between is the scattering of Israel, also known as the time of the Gentiles. So it's just really how long is that time between the judgment of Jerusalem and the judgment of the nations. And so if you look at like Armageddon, for example, that's not the judgment of Jerusalem. That's the judgment of the nations that came against Jerusalem. Yeah. So it's clearly two separate events. It's just the question is how much time do we think happened between them? And the way I'm looking at it here, about 410-ish. If you subtract 70 AD, about 400 years. Thereabouts.
Yeah, I think I heard in the Telegram group not long ago people were arguing that, or speculating the idea, maybe it was me in response to something like, I might have been talking to you actually, but it's the idea of how long is tribulation exactly? Does it last for 400 years then, or is it the 7 years as we've been told, and does that come into play here, or are you just saying there was simply a 7-year tribulation just prior to the 480 and the beginning of the millennium? Where does that play into this view, or do you think it was more of it wasn't a literal 7 years, it was a drawn out 400 years perhaps? How are you interpreting this particular, because I understand you probably have another timeline you're going to show me in a minute and another idea, so we're not wedded to this, are we? I'm guessing, but
I do.
Yeah, if you could just explain that finally. Go ahead. Yeah.
Let me skip over that slide and I'll go to this one. So Revelation 17, 10, and 11 says, there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is, the other is not yet come, and when he comes, he must continue a short space. The beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goes into perdition. Okay. So I'm taking that to mean the Caesars. The kings are the Caesars. So if we look at the left, we have Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. Those are the 5 who have fallen. Galba would be the 6th, who is the one who is. So if that's true, and that's with this interpretation, we have within 7 months the dating of the book of Revelation when it was written, from June of 68 to January of 69. So it would have been right before the fall of the temple in 70 AD. There's here Otho, I guess that's how you would say that. He apparently ruled for 3 months, but he was never confirmed by the Senate. So he was like acting Caesar, but he wasn't actually a Caesar. So if we just he's on the list, but he wasn't confirmed. So if we cross him off, that would mean Vitellius was the 7th, who would continue a short space. He only ruled for 8 months. And then the 8th, who actually sacked Jerusalem, sorry, I scrolled down there, was Vespasian. So he was the 8th, who would have been, I guess, I would say possessed by Satan, or the beast, who was of all of them together, but he was the 8th. So that would be the 8th Caesar, Vespasian. So getting back to the tribulation question, if John was writing this during the time of Galba in, say, 68 AD, that's about 2 years. I'm not sure exactly when in 70 AD. I think it was August, or towards the end of the year anyway. So maybe that's 2.5, maybe 3 years. I'm not sure. If we look at 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,260 days, it might be talking about that time. the actual siege of Jerusalem happened under Nero in
Mm-hmm.
66. So that could be referring to that time from 66 to 70, could be the 3.5 years
Mm.
around there. And I think the 7 year tribulation, I don't really see it. I kind of think that's an interpretation of the last week of Daniel.
Mm-hmm.
People think that's a 7 week tribulation thrown into the future,
Yeah.
but I don't see that actually in Revelation. It just talks about 3.5 and 42 months.
Mm-hmm.
So
No,
I
it's
think that
it.
just might be kind of a remnant
It's a
7 years.
timeline you've got here. Obviously, you're going against mainstream history here because supposedly the Book of Revelation wasn't written by John on Patmos until 20 years after what you're claiming here. Um, so obviously this would have to be. This is in a way revisionist history. Though other people, there's always been speculation over who wrote the book and when exactly. So yeah, I'm willing to take anything right now as a possibility. So I'm fascinated you've compiled this here. I'm just reading through it.
Yeah, and I have no idea if any of this is correct.
Mm-hmm.
Just trying to match some stuff up.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
originally looked at this months ago, and I was like, nope, there's 9. And then I looked into Otho a little more, and like, no, he wasn't actually a Caesar, like technically, actually.
Mm.
So that would be the 8 kings if it's correct. I don't know, and
Mm-hmm.
um, again, was Revelation written after, before? It doesn't say in Scripture.
No.
So it's hard for me to say, history is anywhere near correct. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's just for each person to kind of take this with as many grains of salt as they need, and do some research, and come up with what they come up with.
Oh, absolutely. So, do you have another timeline? You said here, another idea? Do you have or is this it? Is this what you've got here?
No, I've got a whole bunch of stuff. Just
Okay.
how much we have time to get into.
No, go for it. Let's just share what you can while we have the time. I mean, well, what are we on here? How long have I been going for? Let me just check. I've been going for an hour and a half, so we've got another half an hour to go if you want to just keep going. And again, guys, just a caveat as we're explaining here, we're just thinking things through here. This is not like this is definitely how it is, and we all need to get on board with this one particular idea that we're in this timeline. This is just somebody who's been speculating and wants to share his work. That's all it is, right? And that's all we're ever doing when it comes to something like this. But go ahead, keep going. Show me what else you've been thinking about, because I'm always happy to see stuff like this. So go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely, well said. Yeah, this was not my opinion a month ago or even 2 weeks ago. So it's definitely evolving as research continues. So I think Revelation 12 is kind of like from the very beginning to where we are today.
Okay.
The timeline I have the whole chapter up there with a couple things highlighted, but on the bottom on the actual line there, verses 1 and 2, I think the woman that is being spoken of, the woman in heaven,
Mm-hmm.
is New Jerusalem. Isaiah refers to it as a woman. It's referred to as the bride of Christ.
Yeah.
The 12 stars would probably be the 12 tribes of Israel, and all those things. And it kind of like also works with Joseph's vision of the 12 stars and the sun and the moon being Abraham and Jacob and Rebecca, I think, or Rachel. I always get those confused, but it kind of goes with that as well. So the woman, I think, is New Jerusalem. Verses 3 and 4, another wonder in heaven, not on earth, but in heaven, the great dragon and the fallen angels. If we take that, so at that time they fell from heaven,
Mm-hmm.
but they still, as we see in Job, they can kind of go to and fro. They weren't shut out of heaven exactly,
Mm-hmm.
as we see in verse 7 here when the war happens. So they could go to and fro, or at least Satan could anyway.
Yeah.
I think we see in one of the prophets, maybe of Ahab, or I forget one, but one of the prophets has evil spirits, lying spirits within the council of God. So it makes me think that
Well,
they can all kind of go up and down.
like you said, even in Job, Satan was just walking around while God was chilling with the sons of God. You know what I mean? I assume other angels is how I interpret that. And Satan was just there and he just joined in in the conversation, pontificating over Job, and that's where the bet was made. So I agree. It does seem like though he left his first estate and was cast out, he still had abilities to. He was still an angel. That didn't change. His nature didn't change, and his abilities certainly wouldn't have changed. So I can agree with that. But sorry, go ahead. I'll just interject in there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think personally that there's some property of the firmament that does not allow flesh and blood to get through.
Mm-hmm.
So I think anything that was created as spirit probably can still pass through.
Yeah.
Just kind of as an aside with no proof whatsoever, but that's kind of how I see it.
Just speculating. Yeah, I get it. Keep going. That's fine.
Yep. So verse 3 and 4, Satan and the fallen in heaven way back in the day when New Jerusalem was being set up. And then verse 4b, the dragon stood before the woman, New Jerusalem, which was ready to be delivered of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then verse 5, he was incarnated on earth. And before Satan could really get his hooks in there, he was caught up, resurrected in our glorious hope, and caught up to God and to his throne back in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Verse 6, New Jerusalem fled into the wilderness. So I think that means it left heaven and came down to earth. If we want to look at the earth as a wilderness, just as a general, it's not where God is, so it's a wilderness. Where she has a place prepared of God that they should feed her 1,203 score days.
Mm-hmm.
So I take those days as years, which I'm just starting at 480 AD, if that's when she left heaven and came to earth. I don't know that, but we add those and it gets to 1740 AD, roughly.
Yeah.
So that's when the New Jerusalem would have been on earth. So longer than the actual millennium, 1,203 score days. During that time, at some point, Satan's released from the pit. And to me, it makes sense. He knows the scriptures. He knows New Jerusalem and God are going to be on earth.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing he does is goes to heaven and tries to take that over because God's no longer there. So verse 7, he goes to war in heaven to try to take that over with everybody else that came out of the pit with him, the dragon and his angels. But Michael and the good angels prevail. And at that point, which would have been in the past, before the short season began, but after the millennium, the great dragon was finally cast out of heaven once and for all, and now he's back on the earth. And at the end of verse 12, it says he's wrath because he knows he has a short time. I interpret that as the short season, the little season.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating, of course. Yeah. Keep. I'm liking this. Keep going.
So that's on the timeline there. Satan out of pit, goes to heaven, finally can no longer ascend. 12, 13, and 14. At this point, he persecutes the woman, which is still New Jerusalem. So the woman was given 2 wings to fly into the wilderness. I take that as a separate wilderness, which North Pole, invisible, under the ocean, who knows where it is. But she went into her place where she's nourished for times and a half. I take that to mean 350 years. If a time is 100 years, that would be roughly 350 years, which would take us to, adding that to 1740, to 2090. So again, different numbers, but maybe right, maybe wrong. I doubt we have that much time left, but maybe we do. Who knows? So just that's my interpretation with there. And so then the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, after New Jerusalem, that he might try to flood New Jerusalem, right? And if we kind of think that that's what God did to his children, during the actual flood, he's going to try to do the same thing to New Jerusalem and to her children on the earth to flood it. But God's not having it. He made the promise, the covenant, that the earth will not be destroyed at the flood. So the earth helped the woman, opened up the earth's mouth, and swallowed up the flood. I always thought that meant like a chasm opened and the water just poured into it, but it could be like a sponge. It opened up like a sponge. So the ground absorbed the water, which then turned the dirt into mud, which then flowed downhill, and now we have a mud flood. So it wasn't a water flood, it was a mud flood, because the earth, the ground, literally the ground, the dirt, the translation, it absorbed the water, and then where it was pitched and sloped, we have a mud flood. At that point, the dragon is wroth with the woman, but can't get to her because she's in the wilderness being nourished. So then he went to make the war with the remnant of her seed, which is us. So he finally, at this point, goes after the people. So if we want to say that's the beginning of the little season, maybe, I don't know. But he went to heaven, couldn't do anything there, came back down, went after New Jerusalem with water, couldn't do anything there. And he's like, it's out of both of those are now out of my range, so I'm going to go after the people. And that's currently where we are at this point. He's doing everything he can to make war with the remnant of her seed, and that is us.
That final statement as well, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. And I have said that repeatedly. We live in an age where you can know Jesus. We have the offer of free salvation still being offered to us. We live in a world left behind by him, in which his laws and statutes and testimony was spread everywhere and available to all as well. And obviously, he left behind, you could say, all these buildings and the infrastructure for us to live in as well. And it's kind of interesting because you see that these many of, like, say, many values of every country all around the world actually have the basic tenets of God's laws enshrined into their basic laws and rights. Murder's wrong and you'll go to prison for it, basically. You know what I mean? That's the basic stuff, you know what I mean? It's kind of, we all have it kind of written into everyone's laws, and maybe that is all the nations when left did keep the commandments of God, and all Satan's been doing in his little season after his attempts to get the city is, okay, well, I'm just going to chip away at what Jesus left behind, which is this world where people know Christ and can know him, and a world where they have laws.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Yeah, and in a way, that's what we see, isn't it? We see the complete dissolution of family values, core godly values, the re-education of our children, all these things. You know what I mean? We're seeing the complete degradation of good society, and the Christians have been saying for years. We have been saying, look at what the devil's doing to us, and in a way, that's exactly what Revelation 17 is talking about there. Revelations 12 verse 17. So yeah, this is I love this kind of reinterpretation of these type of verses through this new lens, like, because it fits, doesn't it, in a very eerie, telling way. Like the way you've just broke it down and then described it there, this is a testimony that it has already happened to me. Again, it's kind of because we went at it with the lens. Okay, so has the millennial reign already happened? And you reinterpret this whole thing, and it seems like this works. This actually works, and we're living in that Revelations 12 verse 17 period. That it feels right to me, and I don't know. I'm rambling now. I'll let you go, and I think I might be annoying your dogs as well from the sounds of it. So I'll let you go.
I'm really sorry. They're usually very well behaved. They got something going. So yeah, I agree. And there's always been that idea of, like, where does verse 7 fit in? Because we know, like I said, in Job, that he's been up there before, so that can't be that far in the past, really. So people put that in the future, and then it's all over the place. But I think that's a pretty succinct. Again, don't know if it's true, but it helps to kind of read scripture thinking with this in mind.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what would it be? So, for example,
I want you to get together